Hey everyone, Crow back here again to talk a bit about the 10 games included in the Evercade's second arcade collection, Data East Arcade 1. Data East was a company that operated from 1973 through 2003 and not only created video games, but pinball machines for a while as well. Throughout the company's life, they created around 150 games with several well-known classics such as BurgerTime, Bump and Jump, and Heavy Barrel. Data East's game library is currently owned by several different companies, but most of the library is currently owned by Gmode. So as usual, I'll briefly talk about each game in the collection, whether or not I like the games, and afterwards I'll rank them from my least favorite to my most favorite. So let's get started! Way back in Evercade's third cartridge, the Data East Collection 1, we got the NES version of Bad Dudes. And now we're getting the arcade version of that game, which went by the title of Bad Dudes vs. Dragon Ninja, which was released in 1988. Funnily enough, this game just went by the title Dragon Ninja in Japan. This is a game for 1 or 2 players where you are in control of Blade and Striker, a couple of bad dudes, taking out members of the Dragon Ninja throughout 6 levels on a mission to rescue President Ronnie. The controls are very basic with just an 8-way joystick and 2 buttons, one for attack and one for jump. There's not a huge variety of moves as the game plays very simple. The most complicated attack in your arsenal is just holding the attack button down to charge up a powerful punch. I know it's sorta cool that you could do that kind of thing. I never really found much use for it because most enemies will just instantly be taken out with literally any attack. The only exception are the bosses, which can take a ton of punishment before going down. You'll also lose the charge punch if you take a hit, so I think it's just better to keep up with the regular attacks. There are also various items that can be picked up off the ground, like weapons that can be used for better attacks and cans of soda that will replenish your health. There's not really much more to this game. On the Evercade, I think this is the type of game that can be played if you want to play something simple, satisfying, and not really frustrating at all. You get unlimited continues, so you can just keep inserting as many virtual coins as you want until you make it through the game. What I found very odd though is that the score doesn't reset after you continue, although on the high score screen it does show if you did use continues or not. So back when I talked about the Data East collection, I said I wound up liking the NES version of Bad Dudes despite the slow and choppy gameplay, and honestly I still feel the same way about that version. However, the arcade version here is so much more fun to play, with the gameplay being really smooth and just simply playing a whole lot better. And obviously you're getting better graphics and sound to boot. You could play the game to see how far you could get on 1 credit, or if you just want to relax, you can just unload a bunch of credits into the game and play until you get tired of playing it. So I may still like the NES version of Bad Dudes, but I really like the arcade version, and there's not much reason to go back to the more limited NES version unless there's some reason you specifically want to play that version. And finally, I knew before playing this in the Evercade I was really gonna like this one because we've got the BurgerTime Arcade 1-Up machine, and Bad Dudes vs. Dragon Ninja is one of the games included on it. And it also should be noted that this game has one of the greatest video game endings of all time.
I'm bad!
Released in 1986, BreakThru is a pretty unconventional, horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up. Instead of some sort of aircraft or spacecraft, you're in a high-tech car. This has the effect of adding a third dimension to the gameplay, since you'll not only have to dodge bullets, but also have to pay attention to the ground, since you can easily fall off a cliff or crash into a wall. Fortunately, your vehicle is equipped with a jump function that can help you jump walls and gaps in the road. The game's controls are very simple, with just an 8-way joystick and 2 buttons, one for firing and one for jumping. So what's the mission? Well, apparently enemy forces have stolen your secret PK-430 fighter plane, and it's up to you in your high-tech assault vehicle to break through the enemy defenses through 5 stages and retrieve it. As mentioned, your vehicle has a jump feature, and also weaponry that will take out enemy vehicles and soldiers that get in your way. This is a game I was pretty unfamiliar with, and I think that's partially due to the fact that every time I ran across this game and played it, I would get a game over pretty quickly and then just move on to something else. When I sat down to play it on the Evercade, things started the same way, but then I realized that the speed of your vehicle is really the key to surviving. Pushing forward will make your vehicle move faster, and it's necessary for making many of the jumps, but pushing backwards will slow your vehicle, making it much easier to dodge enemy bullets and shoot enemy vehicles. I started doing much better, but I think a certain amount of memorization is needed to make progress in the game. Power-ups will certainly help you out as they'll descend from the sky and you'll have to use your jump ability to nab them out of the air. Most of the power-ups will turn your shooter into a spread gun, however, most of the time it's just temporary. The animation of the vehicle jumping is a little weird to me though, because at the apex of the jump it looks like the vehicle has rotated way more than it should have, and it looks pretty awkward. Well, maybe it's just that the technology of the vehicle is just so far advanced that I can't comprehend it. Like most shoot 'em ups, one bullet is all it takes to destroy your vehicle and claim one of your lives. However, you don't get to continue from the same spot as you're forced back to a previous checkpoint. This makes game progression pretty slow. It's pretty weird to me that even a soldier by himself can destroy your vehicle with only one bullet. I wonder what in the world is standard issue for soldiers in this military? Or maybe it's just that your vehicle is highly combustible. I mean, who knows? And the only reason it looks like I'm playing amazing in the game footage you're seeing is because I abused the hell out of the save states and then I edited the footage. Even then, there were certain parts I had to replay again and again and again just to get by. Anytime a helicopter shows up on screen and starts spraying bullets everywhere is particularly annoying because you can't shoot down the chopper. You just gotta dodge and weave through those bullets, and I was never able to do it successfully on the first try. However, in the end, I'd still say I wound up liking this one despite the difficulty. The music in particular I thought was pretty excellent. If you were allowed to take a few hits before getting destroyed, I'd probably like this one a little bit more though. Released in arcades in 1982, BurgerTime may be the most well-known game in this collection. Like with Bad Dudes, we already got a version of BurgerTime on the Evercade, but it was the NES version, and although I think it's an alright version of the game, most people seem to hate it. The original arcade release of BurgerTime was on Data East's Deco system, where the game was stored on a cassette tape that was loaded into RAM. The whole process to load the tape and boot up the game took a few minutes. I think that's the version of the game that's included in this collection, minus the loading times, because the Deco logo is shown on the first couple screens. So, in BurgerTime, you play as Peter Pepper as he attempts to build these giant hamburgers while avoiding the anthropomorphic food guys that are out to get him. This includes Mr. Hot Dog, Mr. Pickle, and Mr. Egg. Peter Pepper builds the burgers by running across the pieces, causing them to drop. If it drops onto another burger piece, that drops as well, and so on and so on. The goal on each of the 6 screens is to drop all the burger pieces onto the plates below. The food guys can temporarily be eliminated if a burger piece falls on them, or if they are on top of a burger piece as it drops. Doing the latter has the additional benefit of dropping the burger piece multiple levels due to the additional weight. All of the food guys have patterns they follow, so it's not too difficult to avoid them or lure them into a trap. But you're also armed with pepper, which will temporarily stun them, giving you an escape if you get cornered. You'll start with 5 peppers, but can pick up more by collecting certain items that appear in the level, such as ice cream, coffee, or french fries, but you'll need to collect them quickly because they won't stay on the screen for very long. BurgerTime, as always, has been one of my favorite games, and this is certainly much better than the NES version that was in cartridge number 3. However, the type of controller you use to play this game can make a big difference in your performance. The controls in the original arcade cabinet were a 4-way joystick for movement and a button to throw the pepper. The issue is with the joystick. The game only expects one of 4 directions and doesn't like diagonal inputs at all. If you use a joystick or a gamepad that allows for 8 directions, you'll have to make sure not to accidentally press diagonally, because sometimes Peter will just freeze in place and it can mean certain doom if food guys are hot on your trail. I tried the game with several controllers and none of them performed as well as I really hoped, and it's not really the game's fault. We happen to have the BurgerTime Arcade 1-Up machine here, and it's much easier to control since the joystick has a 4-way restrictor plate on it that prevents diagonal movement. If you could play this game with something like that, the game will play fantastic. If not, it's a fun game I still really enjoy, but you'll have to put in extra effort to control Peter Pepper. Chain Reaction is probably better known as Magical Drop these days, but when the original game in the series was released in North American arcades in 1995, the name was changed for some reason. The name change apparently didn't stick because, as far as I can tell, this version of the game is the only one with the name change. Ports of this game to consoles and even its sequels retain the original Magical Drop name. Back in Data East Collection 1, we got the Super Famicom port of this game's sequel, Magical Drop 2. This is a puzzle matching game that can be played in battle mode or solo play. Solo play is just playing as long as you can, while battle mode has you playing against a second player or against 6 CPU opponents. Once all 6 opponents are beaten, you'll go up against the hidden 7th character, which I guess could be considered the final boss of the game. In the game, you'll control a little jester at the bottom of the screen, grabbing and releasing different puzzle pieces as they descend from above. One button grabs the piece and another button releases it. Once you collect the puzzle piece, you can continue to collect more of the same piece before releasing them. If there are 2 or more of the same pieces stacked, you'll collect all the stacked pieces at once. When you release the pieces you've collected, if you form a vertical line of 3 or more of the same piece, they will disappear along with any of the same pieces that are connected to it. You'll sometimes see puzzle pieces with the letter S on them, and these will only connect to the same pieces with S's on them. And if you stack 3 of those together, they will disappear along with all of the same puzzle pieces on the screen without the S on it. In single player mode, the puzzle pieces will descend on you at a steady pace, but in battle mode, creating chains or eliminating many pieces at once will force your opponent's pieces downward. The game ends when the puzzle pieces reach the ground. If you're playing battle mode against a computer, winning will advance you to the next challenger, but if you lose, it'll be game over. However, you can always just insert another coin to try that stage again. Overall, I had a good time with this one. It was pretty addictive, and I liked how the puzzle pieces would change from game to game, though I kind of wish I had the ability to select what tile set I wanted to use, because some sets have pieces that are more visually distinct than others. Now, I liked the game, but there are 3 things that prevent me from really liking it. When I started playing the game, I was using my Hori Real Arcade Pro controller, and it seemed like the game was sometimes not registering my joystick or button movements. It was actually kind of frustrating because I would get into a rhythm, but then all of a sudden I'd either pick up the wrong piece or not pick up a piece or release a piece at the wrong place. And at first I thought it was just me, but then I started noticing that I was hitting the buttons and sometimes nothing would happen. Sometimes I tapped the button twice with no reaction, only for the 3rd button press to register. I swapped in the official Evercade VS controller and it worked a bit better, but the problem didn't completely disappear. My second issue kind of stems from that, and it has to do with the final boss of the game. I found she is damn near impossible. Well, at least for me. I played against her for 30 minutes straight and we get destroyed almost immediately most of the time. I don't know what the arcade game difficulty is set at, but for me it was brutal. That compounded with the controller issues I was having, and there was no chance I would be beating her. And finally, the save states are broken in this game. You can save a game state, but if you load it back up, the game instantly locks up. Now I wonder if some of these issues can be rectified in a firmware update, because the game would be much more fun if these issues could be fixed. In 1986, Data East released Darwin 4078 into Japanese arcade, a vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up with a fairly unique power-up system. Rather than simply having different weapons and upgrades, each capsule you collect will trigger an evolution in your ship, and over time, if you do not collect any capsules, your ship will slowly de-evolve. Getting hit by enemy fire will immediately devolve your ship to its lowest form, and getting hit in that form will destroy your ship. Colliding with any enemy craft will also destroy your ship, regardless of what form it's in. The evolution of your ship is not limited to one path, as there are branching paths to your ship's evolution that can be triggered by evolving and devolving in certain forms, as well as some other forms that require other methods to achieve. Overall, there are 19 different forms your ship can become, each with their own sets of pros and cons. While your primary attacks may change with each evolution, each form also has the ability to drop bombs to hit ground targets. This game had a port for the MSX, but had not been released into any other platform until fairly recently. This game is the first in a line of evolutionary-themed games and was followed by Super Real Darwin, Act-Fancer, and Darwin 4081. Now, I tried to figure out what the plot of this game was, and the best I could get was that the game takes place entirely in a giant spaceship, which seems so massive because it has the ability to warp time and space. The capsules the ship collects to evolve are creatures of pure energy called Evol, and they are in capsules because it's the only way they can exist in the world. And that's about all the info that I can gather. I have no idea why you're fighting or what you're going up against or why, and I guess it really doesn't matter. I thought I'd played this game before on the Data East Arcade Classics compilation for the Nintendo Wii, but it turns out that was Super Real Darwin, so I guess I never really played this one before, but I kind of already knew what to expect. These Darwin games always sounded really interesting to me as a fan of shoot-'em-ups in general, and having a ship that morphs into different forms seems really cool. However, every time I've played a Darwin game, there are elements for me that work against that, and in the end I wind up not really liking or disliking the game, and Darwin 4078 is no exception. I really like the concept of your ship evolving, and the animations between evolutions are pretty cool, but most of the time evolving makes your ship a bigger target, and one hit is all it takes to send you to your most primitive and weakest form. But you'll have to wait for your ship to devolve backwards through all the previous forms before you can open fire again, and that can leave you in a worse position in your weakest form, as it can allow enemies to appear on screen unopposed for the time that you're unable to fire. Most of the time I'd get hit by a bullet I didn't even know was there because the enemy's bullets are so small and can sometimes blend in with the background. I'm also not a fan of having to drop bombs on ground targets because there's no reticle to indicate where your bombs are gonna land, so I wind up having to guess, and sometimes I'll be so focused on figuring out where I need to be to destroy ground targets that I won't notice something else that'll hit and destroy my ship. I'm at odds with this game. I want to like it for the premise, but I wind up not really having any fun when I play it. Here we have Gate of Doom, which was released by Data East in 1990. The game is actually titled Dark Seal outside of North America. The international version of this game is included in this collection since the in-game title comes up as Dark Seal and the text isn't in Japanese. Apparently, humanity has become too corrupted, evil, and wicked, and this has allowed demons and devils to enter our world through the Gate of Doom. It's up to 4 heroes to go on a quest to eliminate the evil hordes and close and seal the Gate of Doom forever. Our selectable heroes are the Knight, who has the strongest weapon, the Wizard, who has the strongest magic, the Bard, who's immune to poison, and the Ninja, who moves the fastest. Each one handling a different weapon and carrying different abilities and stats. The game is presented in an isometric overhead view, and the gameplay is fairly straightforward, relying on an 8-way joystick and 2 buttons. One button for attacking, and the other for activating magic. Magic can only be activated when the magic meter is filled up, and the spell that is activated is whatever happens to be displayed in the on-screen book at the time. The only time you're not allowed to activate magic is during a boss fight. You are allowed 3 lives to start, and you're allowed to continue the game after losing all your lives for another credit. For each continue, you're allowed to change characters if you wish as well. This means that on the Evercade, you can just continue as much as you want, even through the end of the game, which would take about 45 minutes. I mean, that's pretty much what I did, cycling through the character roster one by one at every continue. Overall, I like the game, but there's something about it that prevents me from really liking it. Games like this were obviously meant to be quarter suckers, but I think this game might have taken it a bit too far. I know if I was playing this in an arcade, I might have just given up at a certain point. Maybe I'm just terrible at the game, but there were several bosses that took me multiple continues to get through. There was one dragon I was fighting during the game where I was just dying over and over and over again, and I just couldn't figure out what was hitting me. And then I figured out the dragon was causing flame projectiles to spawn exactly where I was standing. There was a bit of a sparkle to warn you, so you had a second or two to try and get away, but it seemed like a cheap trick to pull on a new player. And it just feels like the game is full of tricks like that. Like the demons that make you confused and reverse your controls so you accidentally walk off a nearby cliff, things like that. One minor annoyance is that every time I lost all my lives, it would ask me to input my initials, but I'd have to re-enter it every time. Well, I guess I could have just entered AAA to speed things up, but since I was continuing, you would think the game might remember who was playing. Regardless, I think the game is fun and I think the soundtrack is really fantastic, and despite the boss fights being a little cheap at times, I thought they all had great designs. This is a good game to just play through every so often. Released in 1992, Wizard Fire, known as Dark Seal 2 in Japan, is the sequel to Gate of Doom. Other than some minor changes here and there, it initially looks and plays pretty similar to its predecessor. The same isometric overhead perspective, the same 2-player simultaneous action, the same controls with the same 8-way joystick, attack and magic buttons, the same magic meter and book that cycles through the spells, and at first glance the game may even be mistaken for its predecessor. However, as you start digging into it, there are plenty of little changes that I believe were for the better. The story this time is that the evil spellcaster Xenon is on a mission to take 101 innocent lives in order to unlock the Dragon Shrine and raise an army of the undead. It was prophesied by a wise sage that when the minions of evil appear, they shall be defeated by the Shining Knights of the Wizard Fire. And who are they? Well, they happen to be your selectable characters for this mission. This time around, there are 5 characters to select instead of 4. Returning from Gate of Doom are the Knight, who is now immune to disease, the Wizard, who still has the most powerful magic, and the Bard, who is still resistant to poison. The Ninja does not return for this game, but instead is replaced by 2 new characters, the Dwarf, who is resistant to confusion, and the Elf, who is the fastest. And there are several other new additions to this game, such as more status ailments to be inflicted by, and more spells to activate. One of the more drastic changes is you now only get 1 life instead of 3 per credit, but you'll be able to survive longer, so the game's not really trying to screw you over or anything, as you'll more than likely survive just as long on 1 credit as in the previous game. And the best addition has gotta be the cutscenes between stages, where we get dialogue so cheesy it's fantastic.
We must stop him! Continue! We will make this pay!
I played this one the same way I played Gate of Doom, where I would just keep continuing, cycling through all the characters until I eventually beat the game. And I've gotta say that overall, I like this one much more than Gate of Doom. It feels like this game was designed to be much more fair to the player. There were much less instances where I felt like I was put at a major disadvantage. The boss fights especially seemed to be more fair, as even with the slow-moving knight, I was able to dodge attacks when I figured out the patterns. Every character has a fair shot at succeeding, whereas in the previous game, some characters seemed to be put at a major disadvantage in some situations. There was only one spot in particular where I had to navigate moving platforms while trying to pass a dragon that gave me significant trouble, but that was pretty close to the end of the game, and other than that, this game was very enjoyable to play through. The graphics were a bit better and a bit more detailed as well, and of course the soundtrack is just as good as it was in the Gate of Doom. When Pac-Man was released in 1980 and became a huge hit, many companies tried their hand in making their own dot-munching maze game. For Data East, this is obviously Lock and Chase, which was released 1 year after Pac-Man in 1981. Like BurgerTime, it was originally released as part of the Deco cassette system, but it was later converted to dedicated hardware and licensed to Taito for distribution. In Lock and Chase, you are a thief locked in a maze with 4 cops, Stiffy, Smarty, Scaredy, and Silly. You'll run around the maze collecting money, which are the dots, and also pilfer any valuables that pop up on screen for a limited time, including the bag of money in the center of the maze. Collecting that will stun all 4 cops very, very briefly. Once all the dots are collected, the exits will open and you can escape to the next level. If the cops catch you, you'll lose a life, lose all your spare lives, and the game is over. The game uses a 4-way joystick and a single button that's used for the game's gimmick. And that gimmick that's been implemented is the ability to close the doors behind you. The idea being that if a cop is chasing you, you can shut the door behind you and force him to take a different route. A shut door will slowly disappear over time, and you can only have 2 closed doors on the screen at any time. There are also fixed doors in each level that will constantly open and close. And that's all there really is to this one, so I'll get to the point. I don't really like or dislike this game. It's an interesting concept, but the whole door closing thing doesn't seem to be that critical in playing the game. I would sometimes even forget about it completely. But you know what? I'm sure not an expert at the game, so maybe there is some crazy door closing techniques that I just don't know about. I've heard about a strategy that involves trapping the cops in between 2 doors, but with the way the maze is laid out, there are very few places you could actually do that. Now, I find that most of the sound effects coming from this game are adequate, but whenever that bag of money appears, the tune that plays to make you aware of it is this annoying, ear-piercing tune. I originally had played the Intellivision port of this game, and when that tune would play, I'd think, man, that's kind of an odd tune. The arcade version must sound much better. Well, nope, not really. I think if the door closing feature was implemented a bit better, and if that bag of money tune was made more pleasant sounding, I'd probably like this game more. I kind of wish the treasures would stay on the screen a bit longer too, especially the money bag. It seems like you've got to be really close to it when it appears in order to be able to nab it. But it's definitely not a bad game as it is, though. Known as Secret Agent in Japan and Europe, this game is known as Sly Spy in North America, and it was originally released to arcades in 1989. The game starts out by letting you pick your agent number, and then you're informed that terrorists from the Council for World Domination have infiltrated the city, and it's up to you to get them before they kill innocent people. You'll then jump out of a plane and into the action across 9 levels featuring various scenarios. You'll fight off terrorists while skydiving, give chase on a motorcycle, attack underwater in a scuba suit, but most stages will simply have you traversing the level on foot. If you fail in your mission, the world will be annihilated in a nuclear holocaust. The game features an 8-way joystick and 2 buttons used for jumping and shooting. The ammo in your gun is limited, and if you run out of bullets, you'll have to rely on your karate moves to stay alive. The game was clearly influenced by the James Bond series, and it has several references to it. One of the bosses clearly looks to be modeled after Jaws, and another looks like Oddjob. I mean, he even throws his hat at you. As you play, you'll pick up pieces to the Golden Gun, yet another reference. Once acquired, the Golden Gun will give you unlimited large bullets,
Golden Gun.
but for a limited amount of time. You'll get 1 life per credit, however it's not too difficult to stay alive for quite a while. When you do die, you're given a countdown of 10 seconds to add another credit to continue, and you'll always continue exactly where you died, as if nothing has happened. On the Evercade, this makes it very easy to leisurely play through this game. Now, I've played Sly Spy before, but I never stuck around past the 2nd level. I mean, I don't know why, I guess I just wanted to move on to another game. However, in playing it all the way through, I gotta say I wound up liking this whole game better than I thought I would. It's kind of fun to be changing things up a little every level or so. The game conveys the spy genre pretty good, complete with a death trap you need to escape at the end of the game. One odd thing though is that some of the bosses in the game are incredibly easy to beat. The death trap I mentioned earlier is no big deal once you know what you need to do, and after that the game is pretty much over. There is a cheap trick at the end though. After you beat the game, the president tells you that you saved the world, but you missed a few things, so you better go back and get them. I immediately started wondering what there was that I missed. I started checking gameplay footage on YouTube and found that everybody that played this game got the same exact message at the end. Well, it turns out that it's more than likely that there aren't items that you missed, and there is no other ending to the game. The message is more than likely there just to encourage players to keep pumping quarters into the machine and look for things that aren't there. Pretty damn sneaky if you ask me. The final game here is Tumblepop, which was released in arcades in 1991. When I first saw this game, I thought, this seems to be a bit like Bubble Bobble. You, and optionally a second player, play through a series of single-screen levels, navigating the platforms and eliminating all the enemies on screen to proceed to the next. Take too long and an indestructible monster appears on screen and slowly creeps towards you until you die or complete the level. Both games even use an 8-way joystick and 2 buttons, one of which is for jumping. But it's that second button that makes Tumblepop play completely different. In the game, you play as a couple of, well, I guess you could call them paranormal eliminators, and they travel the world getting rid of all sorts of creatures, such as cavemen, clowns, snowmen, man-eating plants, robots, and ghosts. Whereas Bub and Bob would have trapped them in bubbles and popped them to eliminate the creatures, in Tumblepop, you hold a button down to activate your vacuum and suck up the creatures. When you release the button, you'll shoot them out, eliminating them and any other creatures they bounce into. The more monsters you suck up at once, the bigger the ball of creatures you'll shoot out, and it'll also bounce around more before it gets destroyed. The one thing you need to be careful of is that if you hold a creature too long in your vacuum, it'll blow up, taking one of your lives with you. So this leads to situations where you may be trying to suck up maybe just one more creature before your vacuum explodes, just so you can shoot out a bigger and more destructive ball of enemies. It's an interesting mechanic of risk versus reward. Destroyed enemies will also leave behind treasures to collect, and eliminating more enemies will lead to there being more treasures. There are also hidden power-ups and items in the levels that can be revealed by just shooting these creatures past these spots. Letters will also occasionally appear, and if you can spell out Tumblepop, you'll be teleported away to a bonus level. You can collect gems and even extra lives. At the end of every area, there is a boss to eliminate, such as a clown throwing bombs, a genie, a giant snowman, a dragon made of fire, and a kraken. If you lose all your lives, you'll be able to continue right where you left off. Now, at first, I didn't really know how to feel about this game. I mean, it kinda seemed a little bit like Bubble Bobble at first, but as I played, I started to get more and more into it, and then I eventually understood you really can't play this like Bubble Bobble. I really liked this one. I liked it so much, in fact, that I wound up playing through the game twice. Mainly because I was doing so bad the first 30 minutes or so that I played, that I just had to play those levels again. And once I figured out the right strategies for playing this game, I was hooked, and I just had to play the rest of the levels again. I thought the bosses were incredibly fun and fair as well. I really didn't mind the final few stages of the game being a boss rush of all the previous bosses. The only one complaint I may have about the game is that once I really got into it, the game was maybe just a bit too easy. I mean, there's no doubt that Bubble Bobble is a more difficult and challenging game, but this one is a relaxing good time. And that's all 10 games from Data East Arcade 1, a collection of games where there wasn't one I didn't like. My least favorite of the group, though, was Darwin 4078. The evolution gimmick is interesting, but the more you evolve, the bigger a target you become, and I just wound up not enjoying it as much as the other titles. At number 9 is Lock and Chase, the Pac-Man clone with the door gimmick. Again, I didn't really like nor dislike this one, but the game's main gimmick is closing doors, and I would forget all about it most of the time. Number 8 is BreakThru. I like this game and its jumping car, but sometimes the game's difficulty is just a touch overboard in some places, and sometimes it can be hard to decipher where you're going to land after you jump. At number 7 is Sly Spy. Nothing really wrong with this action game, but it does pull that dirty trick on you at the end of the game where it says you may have missed stuff where you really didn't. And number 6 is Chain Reaction, a fun puzzle game, but I swear the game ignores my controller inputs sometimes. It feels like I'm moving faster than the game wants me to. Breaking the top half of the list at number 5 is Gate of Doom, the fantasy beat-em-up with an isometric view. Number 4 is Bad Dudes vs. Dragon Ninja, a fun side-scrolling beat-em-up with one of the greatest video game endings of all time. At number 3 is Wizard Fire, the sequel to Gate of Doom that really expands over the original with voice cutscenes and more characters to select from. At number 2 is Tumblepop, the game that becomes incredibly fun once you get a handle on the vacuum mechanics. And finally, at number 1, it can't be anything other than BurgerTime. I mean, it's one of my favorite arcade games of all time, so it really can't be anywhere other than in this spot. And that's all for this video. In the next Evercade video, I'll talk about the third arcade collection, Galco Arcade 1, and that'll be a good one because there are some incredibly bizarre games in that collection. See you next time.